Good evening everyone and welcome to an Cyclone Chasers update, January the 7th, 2013. We're going to kick off with a look at the infrared imagery and the lightning tracker courtesy of weatherzone.com.au for all your weather graphics. And what we find here is we have a lot of thunderstorm activity off the coast associated with a monsoon trough and associated with a tropical low developing to the southwest of East Timor. This afternoon at 2:40 p.m, the Australian Bureau of Meteorology issued their first cyclone update on this. This is not a cyclone watch or a cyclone warning, it's just a cyclone update. This low at 2 p.m. was centered here to the southwest of Timor and pushing to the southwest or west-southwest. Now, the big thing I'd like you to note here is the amount of intensification it gets between 2 p.m. or tomorrow afternoon basically all the way through to Wednesday afternoon, which is 24 hours time. It goes from Cat 1 to a Cat 3. Now that's phenomenal intensification, so let's talk about why that might be happening. So the Bureau in their latest technical outlook or technical summary have told us that the environment is favourable for further development with deep moisture, upper divergence and vigorous westerly monsoonal flow to the north. Intensification is expected to return to a more normal rate once the system becomes more organised and gets closer to the upper ridge. Tropical cyclone is expected to form late Tuesday or early Wednesday and then expected to intensify later in the week as it moves southwest. Now here's the key: the tropical cyclone is forecast to move closer to WA later in the week under the influence of an approaching upper trough, but its longer term movement is uncertain, so they can't really say yet if it's going to cross the coast or not. So what's this upper divergence stuff that the bomb talk about? Well, basically with the low being here, the low to become a cyclone needs tall thunderstorms that continually regenerate bigger and stronger as they go. And with that, what happens is at the surface, winds come in to replace the winds going up or the air going up. Now, what happens is at the top, once the air can't climb any higher because the atmosphere warms, it's got to go somewhere. Now, if there's no upper divergence, and divergence means the winds spread out, so they spread out from a middle point. Okay? Now, if there's no upper divergence, what happens is the high cloud of a storm sits over the top of where the storm's trying to grow, and it limits the potential for that storm to continue to grow. And so what eventually happens is the storms die and the cyclone or the low can't get itself going. So what's happening now is that this low is located in this region here, and it's pushing towards that area of extreme upper divergence. So it's pushing into a really favorable area, and we saw that when I first showed you that infrared image with all the lightning. All the lightning is happening out to the west or the southwest of the system under this upper divergent area. So this cyclone or this low is tracking directly into that really favorable region right there. Now, the other thing the Bureau talk about is that low or that cyclone pushing into an area of very good moisture levels, and we see that fairly clearly in this diagram or this image that shows us water vapor in the atmosphere. Now we can see some really dry air, which is shown by this orangey red colouring over central Australia, and we can see some really dry air in behind a trough line here. But where the cyclone is, the entire region around it, or the low, I've got to stop calling it a cyclone yet, where the low is, the entire area around it is very moist and very unstable. So unlike a normal severe storm, tropical cyclones need moisture throughout a whole level of the atmosphere. So from the surface all the way up, they need moisture badly, and so if they get any of this orangey reddy type colouring coming anywhere near them, it will weaken them very quickly. This one, no such problem. And if we take a closer look at a more computer enhanced image, now it's very difficult to see in this image, but this is the Australian coastline where my cursor is, and this is where our tropical low or cyclone will eventually push into. You can see this entire region has got a huge amount of moisture. This red colouring shows huge amounts of moisture. The purple, so it goes from just massive amounts where it is now to still massive amounts, and its entire track forecast, which suggests a track of like this, and then we don't know whether it'll go that way or whether it'll go bang straight into the coast. But its entire track forecast suggests there's going to be huge amounts of moisture throughout its entire lifetime, so moisture should not be a problem. If you remember when we did our cyclone update for Mitchell, moisture was always going to be a problem for Mitchell, especially once he got south of about 20 degrees south. This one, no such issue at the moment, and probably no such issue for at least the next couple of days. So if we look at where the centre might be located, at 4 p.m. it was located at about 120.5 degrees south, and the satellite interpretation of the winds suggests that it's around about 11.5 south, 120.5 east, and that was at 4 p.m. today. So let's take a closer look at these winds. And to the south of the system, we've got these southeasterly winds at 25 knots coming straight into the circulation centre. To the north of the system, we have 25 to 30 knots of northwesterlies coming at the system. Now, these northwesterlies won't penetrate or get close to the circulation for another 24 to maybe even 48 hours. Now, once they do, and they converge with the easterlies coming through as well, they're going to increase and enhance the rotation of this system, and they're going to increase and enhance the thunderstorms, rainfall, and associated wind with this system. So we're going to see a whole bunch of things colliding at about the same time, and that could result in that rapid intensification the Bureau's hinting at in their technical outlook. Alright, let's have a look where it's going to go. Alright, now this is the Euro Ensemble, so this is 50 models run at 10 AM this morning, and this is the output that they've come out with, and it's a better guidance than just using the one model. It's a bit more tricky to understand, but it's better guidance, so it's more likely to be correct, or at least a better chance of being more correct, if you like. Alright, so this is 48 hours, so we're looking at Wednesday, and we're looking at a tropical cyclone by that stage, according to this model, well off the North Kimberley coast, directly south of Indonesia. At 72 hours, we see a slow southwesterly drift, or a more south-southwesterly drift of the system, and we see it most likely to be positioned right in there. But we also see a little bit of variance in the guidance that suggests that it could be positioned anywhere really in this red circle, and even in fact a lot further to the west than this particular overall suggestion shows. If we look at 4 days' time, now the key thing here is between days 3 and 4, the Bureau are tracking a troughs type system that pushes through the southern part of WA, pushes past, and at this stage the guidance suggests that this trough system won't capture the cyclone and push it towards the coast. Overall, it pushes this ridge in underneath the cyclone, and this ridge will try to drift the cyclone out to a more westerly direction, or a west-southwesterly direction in the longer term. Now, this is the doubtful part of the forecast, because really, if that trough does enhance or extend northwards, what we call amplify to the north, it may in fact capture the cyclone, or if not capture it, at least steer it in a more southerly direction for a while, which would put it directly on course for hitting the coast. But look, on the basis of what we're seeing there, at 96 hours, the cyclone is remaining well off the coast. With so many things in play at that stage, let's have a look at 4 days' time how the upper level systems are in play as well. Now, what we have is we have a big ridge here at the surface, but in the upper levels we have a trough. Now, what's going to happen is that in the upper levels we're going to see winds coming this way, and in the surface level we're going to see winds coming back that way, and that's going to cause a lot of wind shear. Now, if the system gets too close to that trough line, we're going to see a lot of wind shear acting on the system after about Friday or Saturday, and that could be why a lot of the modelling is suggesting that it starts to weaken as it gets closer to the coast. Now, that's highly doubtful. Like, we're still not sure on that, but that's what this suggests to us at the moment. Now, what we see out here in Central Australia is an upper level high. Now, that upper level high will try to push the cyclone in that direction if it's close enough to it. So if that upper high is there, it's going to try to push the cyclone southwest. Now, as the cyclone rounds that ridge, it's going to start to be influenced more by the northwesterlies, and so we're probably looking at it still a track, like we said last night, of that type of track, but remaining very highly doubtful. And you know, if it decides that if it decides to or this high, sorry, decides to push a little further to the east or not be as strong, that southerly drift becomes much more pronounced and happens much earlier. Now you can see the model guidance is still all over the shop. There's still high amounts of variability on day 4, which is Friday. Depending on how this trough impacts it, how this high impacts it, and then not only that, not only do we have some doubt as to where it's going to go in the long term, whether it's going to go south, southeast, southwest, west, we've also got huge doubt on the intensity of the system, because once we start to get cyclones that are well away from a trough will form and intensify rapidly. Cyclones that get too close to the trough will get sheared away, and so they'll weaken very rapidly. So we've got huge divergence in the models. So I'm not even going to go past 4 days at the moment because there's just way too much variability. But suffice to say, this entire area, particularly this area here on Friday, is really potentially in the firing line there. So we're talking anywhere sort of west of Headland we'll need to keep an eye on this particular system. And probably if you're west of Karratha, it'd probably be a good idea now to start checking your cyclone kit to make sure you've got everything in it, so you don't get into the mad panic and mad rush in a couple of days' time when it does start to drift to the south, and no one else has taken precautions, so you're not joining that mad rush. So it'd be a good idea just to make sure that you're stocked up now. But as I say, huge amounts of variability does not necessarily mean it's going to hit the coast, but certainly interests anywhere headland west need to be ready for that as a potential result. Okay, so let's go through model by model. 72 hours, 3 days time. That is on Thursday. Thursday morning, we have a fairly strong tropical cyclone, probably a Cat 3, possibly even higher there on the European model. And we've also got a fairly decent tropical low. Now, we haven't talked about the Coral Sea, we will shortly. But let's focus on this one for a bit. We've got a fairly strong tropical cyclone there directly north of the Pilbara coastline now Friday. Let's head to day 4, and day 4 still a Category 3 tropical cyclone there to the northwest or north-northwest of the Pilbara or far western Pilbara, and possibly directly north of Exmouth at that stage on the Friday. According to remember, this is according to this model. They're not all saying the same thing, and we'll go through the others. By Saturday, we see the system being starting to be cradled by a bit of a ridge. Now, this is the highly doubtful part of the forecast here, is because it's getting cradled out to the west by a ridge, but in the upper levels, there seems to be an upper level trough that's right over through here on the Saturday. So let me show you that upper level trough. So you see this ridge here, this is a big upper level high. Now, the upper level high will, as we've already explained in the last few videos, try and track things in that direction. Now, the upper level trough coming through here is starting to develop or form, and will want to push this thing in that direction. So overall, the fact that the model continues to push it to the west, it's a little doubtful. So therefore, we're not quite sure on this forecast. So this is by Saturday, the 12th of January, still remaining well off the Gascoyne coastline. If we fast track to Sunday, then we see it pushing just to the or probably a couple of 100 kilometers away from Exmouth as it sort of rounds the bend. Then by Monday it starts to definitely weaken by the looks of that, bit sheared away in terms of its wind strengths, and we still see it to the west of probably Coral Bay area on the Monday. So it's but remember, this forecast is very highly doubtful from this model and from every model that far out, because we just don't know what's going to happen in the longer term, what's going to steer it. Alright, let's have a look at the other models. Okay, just quickly taking a look at the GFS model. It has the system right where the European has it, right where the bombs initialized it. and pushes it directly to the south from that location. That seems like a very highly doubtful forecast, so it throws out a lot of the rest of the forecast because of that initial southward movement. The fact that it hugs the coast is now less likely. We do still expect the system to track into here. Because it's also tracking it south, it's not tracking it into a region or that we showed you of that very, very good upper divergence. So therefore, it's probably underestimating its intensity as Cat 1 or 2 tropical cyclone. So this model scenario probably less likely than the others. This is the scenario shown by the UK Met. The UK Met is likely the second most accurate according to verification data model on the planet, and so it's got the system pushing to the west or southwest, forming it and fairly steadily intensifying it, and then gradually intensifying it into a Cat 3 type cyclone as it pushes southwards, and according to this modelling is suggesting a crossing west of Karratha to Exmouth in that region. So we see that southerly drift. Now, as I say, there's a high amount of variability as to what the cyclone does in this area here, whether it then decides to go west, southeast, south, just too much variability in this region. So this is what this model suggests will happen. So it ends up hitting the coast as a Cat 2 or 3. No gaps push the system out to the southwest and gradually intensify it into a Cat 2 system, but don't have it impacting the coastline. So that's the no gap solution. So folks, it's still up in the air long term. We just can't give you any real evidence of either a coastal crossing or not, and we can't really say too much more other than anywhere west of Port Hedland, possibly including Port itself, needs to pay attention to this system. And as I say, particularly if you live in that Karratha to Exmouth area, just be making your preparations with your cyclone kits, because as I say, even if the worst case doesn't happen and you don't get hit, at least you've got the cyclone kit ready for the next one. And look, the models are pretty suggestive long term of a fairly active season out there with those sort of sea surface temperatures. Alright, let's talk about the Coral Sea. Okay, issued today, the monsoon trough currently extends from Torres Strait into the northwestern Coral Sea. A low is expected to form on that trough on Tuesday, may develop further later this week. And that's what the models are showing. As I said last night, the trend was starting to show that conditions aren't as bad as we first thought. The wind shear in the Coral Sea will die down. And let's have a look at wind shear while we talk about it. Okay, so this is the dreadful Coral Sea at the moment. It is just sheared to the max. That means that there is absolutely not one way that the tropical cyclone could possibly survive in that over the next 24 or so hours. Now, the good news, and there is good news out of this, is that this wind shear will die off over the next 3 to 5 days. And by this weekend, the Coral Sea should be a nice little warm pool of water that is not being sheared away dreadfully like it is at the moment. Let's have a look at how bad this is in comparison to normal. Folks, this is a look at the wind shear anomaly chart. Now, this tells us why cyclones just are not forming in the Gulf and are not forming in the Coral Sea. We have an anomaly of maximum anomaly of wind shear here. There is just so much shear happening compared to what is normal for this time of year. And it also helps to account for why southeast Queensland, which normally has a very active storm season, is not having an active storm season at all. There is almost zero shear in this area, and there's way too much shear up here. And so while that's still happening, we're not going to see tropical cyclone formation. The good news, as I say in the Coral Sea, is the pattern is about to change. Okay, so let's track our little low. Our little low forms here sometime on Tuesday night or Wednesday. So this is now Wednesday morning. This is now Wednesday at 10 a.m. and we see that it's really a trophy type low pressure area just all the way through to the Torres Strait all the way through to the northwest Coral Sea. So there's no real low to speak of, but we do see some elongated circulations here along the trough line. And so as we track those circulations through to Thursday morning, we start to see, this is by the way the colouring around it shows us wind speeds, we start to see that by Thursday morning we start to increase wind speeds of 15 to 20 knots from the north and 15 to 20 knots from the east, coming in, converging over this low level circulation here. And this is Thursday morning, positioned well to the east of around about Cairns, and continuing to push at that point in time to the southeast. And if we fast forward there to Friday morning, just to show you that push, we see it there pushing, but really starting to weaken that push. So the push from the start, which is where it develops up here near the Gulf of Papua, out to here is fairly rapid, but then the steering level breaks down, and so we have a 25 to 30 knot winds on the south side, 25 to 30 knot or 20 to 25 knot winds on the eastern side. Not much happening to its north. The monsoon to its north is a little inactive, but there's certainly enough there to suggest that the system has some potential for development there as we head later in the week. Now later in the week, wind shear also dies down, and if we overlay shear as to where the system is, it's still not great. Don't get me wrong, it's still not great. So we've still got 40 knots of shear to the west of it, but overall the Coral Sea wind shear conditions do improve, and that improvement continues as we head through the forecast period. So if I fast track you then to next Monday, by next Monday we've still got the low still as a circulation, as a feature, still off to, it's come back to the west and sitting off the coast of Cooktown on Monday. And so really the conditions in the Coral Sea by then start to improve. Now if I overlay shear by next week, and you can see very little wind shear, the red and the purples here in this wind shear chart show very little wind shear. Blue shows low to moderate wind shear, still survivable, still able to develop a cyclone in it. So look, overall conditions in the Coral Sea certainly improve as the week progresses, particularly after the weekend. And if we have a look now, if we overlay 300 hectopascal winds, we can see that overall the upper levels, the winds become much lighter from west to east, and so the steering of these systems that has been happening all the way through the last couple of months, where we've just had upper trough over upper trough out here in the Coral Sea, does look like it's going to stop. Alright, let's have a look at what the other models are doing with it. So far I've shown you the EC, and the EC develops the system here, pushes it southeast, actually makes it into a fairly reasonable tropical low, possibly even, I'd hate to use the word cyclone, but it makes it into a very strong low, and then weakens it and pushes it back to the west. So let's see what the others do with it. The UK Met model's already formed it off the coast of PNG and will push it slightly to the south, but then takes a track to the east or southeast, doesn't deepen it significantly, somewhere between 1,000 and 1,010 hectopascals throughout the entire life cycle, but it has the system continuing to push to the east, albeit reasonably slowly between the 10th and the 11th, but still under the influence of some troughing as it leaves the Coral Sea. The GFS system, the GFS model also shows a very similar track to the European, forms it out here or a little bit further to the south than the European, pushes it to the east, and then the upper troughing dies down, and so we see a track back to the west. But we have a whole range of other issues that are going to stop this from forming in the longer term, and we'll have a look at what those could be. But look, overall, very similar track to the European, 1,000 to 1,010 hectopascals throughout its entire lifetime. And once again, if we look at the Canadian model, very similar stuff again from the Canadian. We see it forming here in a couple of days, pushing to the southeast. As I say, that wind shear and that steering flow starts to die off. We don't consistently see this movement to the southeast. By this weekend or early next week, we start to see that, or we see that completely die off, and we do see the potential for the system to drift back to the west or northwest, but also at the same time weaken as it does that. But this model has it possibly forming into a very deep tropical low, even a borderline category 1 tropical cyclone. And finally, looking at the NOGAPS model, it forms it right now, or in fact in 24 hours time, pushes it out to the east and continues to push it out to the east towards Fiji. We hope that that doesn't happen. But, you know, if it gets too far to the eastern Coral Sea, then it will continue to track that way. But if it stays out here in the central or northern Coral Sea, as I say, the steering flow does change. There is light at the end of the tunnel for the Coral Sea cyclone season. I know it's been a long tunnel, but we're starting to see a change in the trending of the upper level winds starting this weekend. So if it forms now, it's going to push southeast, yes. But after this weekend, there is growing model consensus that says the entire regime out here, wind regime, changes, becomes much more favourable for tropical cyclogenesis. So something to definitely be aware of in the Coral Sea in the longer term. Look, our eyes are firmly planted on the northwest, no doubt about it, but there is growing consensus in the modelling that this low at least could be at a feature. Not saying it's going to be a tropical cyclone, but it could at least be a synoptic feature that we will need to keep an eye on later on in the week. Alright, that's our update for tonight, folks. If you haven't voted, have a go. Tomorrow midday it shuts. Have a midday Queensland time. Have a go and tell us, where do you think Tropical Cyclone Narelle will hit on our Facebook poll. Alright, thanks very much for watching tonight, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow night.